I'd like to just wait a couple minutes past time. It's only 6:01. So,
that should be fine. And I think if I see this correctly, I think one of the participants is Spectrum News.
yes, one of them. I mentioned that. And welcome, Spectrum News. We're very, very glad that you're here.
In what capacity are they here?
That's a good question. Do you want to answer that? You'll
Can
have
I answer it?
here, I unmute your phone here in case it's easier for me to do it than you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Brandon Lewis. I'm a reporter with Spectrum News Buffalo. We were just watching to do a story on this tonight.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you just repeat?
Can you hear me now? Is it good?
I can hear you.
Okay, I was just saying I'm a reporter at Spectrum News Buffalo, and we were watching this to run a story on the conversation tonight.
I think that's great myself. And again, just to full disclosure, so if that's a problem for anyone, then, you could either, we will have this as a recording that we can share and maybe put on the website, or there is going to be another session that will be 1 o'clock in Niagara Square. So in person, or Liberation, also known as Liberation Square, that people are welcome to as well.
As I said, I'll say again that if anybody has specific questions, considering it's being recorded and that the news media is here, there's going to be plenty of contact information at the end, and we can address those matters offline and elsewhere.
So, in as much as John, Vicki, and I haven't talked before, just so the rest of you are aware of that. We didn't specifically get together and talk about this, so this is pretty much a dry run for us, and we're going to probably learn more than you are attempting to do this, as far as like how to put together a good Zoom presentation. So your feedback's going to be critical. Also, because we didn't discuss this before, I'm just curious, can I talk to the reporter again real quickly? What was his name? Brandon from Spectrum?
Yeah, Brandon Lewis from Spectrum. I'm here.
Yeah,
Right.
So you're tape recording this. Do you anticipate actually using sections of it?
Yeah, we were going to record the entirety of the conversation tonight from 6 to 8. So, yes.
Well, I don't think we'll go to 8. So
Okay.
Talking about, I think it would probably be, certainly not much over an hour, if that, if over.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah, we were just going to record the entirety of the conversation.
Sure, and we'll be recording it too, just by the way. So just so everyone who is, on, who's a participant, we want to be sure people are clear on that. So you can just bear that in mind, and bear in mind that we'll have all these recordings of it, and we will be also in Niagara Square at 1 o'clock on Sunday. And I apologize to the people who got on early that you just heard this information over again. But anyway, we're grateful for all the people who have come in. I think there's always a certain amount of shared learning. We all have different experiences, and we can share, our experiences as well, which can help illuminate, what's going on, what can go on, what some of the pitfalls might be, and what some of the solutions might be too. So maybe I think we're really at a time where we could really start. It's 5 minutes after. I think that's giving people a little time, and we still might have people coming in. And
that sounds fine.
Yeah, and so I just want to, as I said, I introduced myself. I'm Vicki Ross, the director at the Western New York Peace Center. And we are really thrilled to have John Kerr, who is the regional representative of NYCLU, that's the New York chapter or version of the ACLU. And hi, John.
Hi. We are the ACLU of New York. I'm
ACLU.
a Western Regional Office Director here in Buffalo, and we're responsible for the western 8 counties of the state.
Right, and there's a huge amount been going on, so we really appreciate your time. And of course, dear Brian Irwin, there is our favorite attorney, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound and do all that. It really has a huge handle on what's going on legally, especially in terms of civil resistance and civil disobedience. There.
Try to.
Well, you do. So, with that, I guess I'd like to just hand it over to John, who's brought this wonderful presentation, and we'll start with that.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, Dare, for making time to do this as well. In very general terms, this is very general information, and we'll stop at a couple of different points to see if there's questions. And there'll be time at the end to ask questions. We got a lot of contact information at the end as well, not just for us, but for the local chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, who does a lot of the lion's share of the legal observing and monitoring here in Buffalo, Western New York. As I said, we are the New York Civil Liberties Union. We're the ACLU of New York. We've done in the city of Buffalo, Dare before me, and through the years, we've done a lot of protest monitoring, legal observing in a lot of different situations. And this is a lot of the information that we feel is a good place to start. Let me see. There we go. Next page. First, the First Amendment protects your right to assemble and express your views through protest. Police and government officials are allowed to place certain narrow restrictions, what we call time, place, and manner restrictions, on the exercise of speech rights. Make sure you're prepared by brushing up on the rights before heading out into the streets. If you're organizing a protest, your rights are strongest in what are known as traditional public forums, such as streets, sidewalks, and parks. You may also have the right to speak out on other public property, like plazas in front of government buildings, as long as you're not blocking access to the government building or interfering with other purposes the property was designed for. In the state of New York, you also must remain moving, although many times that's not strictly enforced. Private property owners can set rules for speech on their property. The government may not restrict your speech if it's taking place on your own property or with the consent of the property owner. Counter-protesters also have free speech rights. Police must treat protesters and counter-protesters equally. Police are permitted to keep antagonistic groups separated, but should allow them to be within sight and sound of one another. There's plenty of times that is not the case, and I'm sure many of you have seen the same thing. When you're lawfully present in any public space, you have the right to photograph anything in plain view, including federal buildings, public buildings, cars on the street, and the police. On private property, the owner may set rules related to photography or video. If you feel like your rights have been violated, when you can, write down everything you remember, including officers' names, badge numbers, patrol car numbers for the agency they work for. It's helpful to do this as soon as possible after the event while your memory is still mostly intact. Information from contact witnesses is very important here, and photographs of injuries or anything relevant to the circumstances that you're describing. And while the next step is standard, I'm going to say that I prefer you gave us a call next, or reached out to the National Lawyers Guild, but and we can help you with the process of filing a written complaint, either with the internal affairs folks, the police department, or civilian complaint board, which is under review right now. And I'm hoping we have a better outcome of what that group can do and what that looks like moving forward. For those attending a protest, your rights are strongest in what is known as traditional public forums, streets, sidewalks, and parks. You also have the right to speak out on public property, again, as in plazas or government buildings, as long as you're not blocking access. This is a little bit of overlap from the organizing, but it's just as relevant. Of course, private property owners can set their own rules. The government may not restrict your speech if it's taking place on your own property or with the consent of the property owner. And that applies to counter protesters as well. You don't need a permit to march in the streets or on sidewalks as long as marchers don't obstruct car or pedestrian traffic. If you don't have a permit, police officers can ask you to move to the side of a street or sidewalk to let others pass or for safety reasons. This is a bit of a gray area, and it's a gray area because there are certain circumstances in which law enforcement and municipalities can require permits, and we'll talk about that moving forward. Again, if you believe your rights have been violated, as much information as possible, write it down as soon as you can. Information from witnesses, photographs of anything that might be relevant, and then reach out to us or the National Lawyers Guild locally for the best next steps forward, depending upon the circumstances of your situation. If the police issue orders to disperse at a protest, shutting down a protest through a dispersal order must be law enforcement's last resort. Police may not break up a gathering unless it's clear and present danger of riot, disorder, interference with traffic, or other immediate threats to public safety. Many times this is not articulated. We also know many times this doesn't take place this way. That's, again, something that we can be helpful with, something that the Lawyers Guild here in the city can be helpful with if we're made aware of these situations. If officers issue a dispersal order, they must provide a reasonable opportunity to comply, including sufficient time and a clear, unobstructed exit path. Again, this does not always hold true. We've seen it more and more where that historically has not been a huge issue in the city of Buffalo. Recently it has become an issue, and many of the news events of late will bear that out. Again, individuals must receive clear and detailed notice of a dispersal order, including how much time they have to disperse, the consequences of failing to disperse, and what clear path they can follow before they can be arrested or charged with any crime. We might as well put an asterisk next to that because we know that that does not always hold true. If you want to take pictures or shoot video to protest, when you are lawfully present in that space, you have the right to photograph anything in plain view. Once again, including federal buildings and the police. On private property, the property owner can set the rules. Police officers may not confiscate or demand to view your photographs or video without a warrant, nor may they delete data under any circumstances. However, they may order citizens to cease activities that are truly interfering with legitimate law enforcement operations. And again, that's in the eye of the beholder. It's very subjective. If you're videotaping, be aware that there's an important legal distinction between a visual photographic record fully protected and the audio portion of a videotape, which some states have tried to regulate under state wiretapping laws. Again, this information was from our national office. New York State does not have that problem. New York is a one-party consent state with regard to recording, as well as in public. If you're stopped or detained for taking photographs, remain calm, never physically resist a police officer. Police cannot detain you without reasonable suspicion that you have or are about to commit a crime or in the process of doing so. I'll just say right now, that's a most perfect world because we watched what happened to one of the National Lawyers Guild legal observers plainly marked last week. Be careful is the number one method of advice here. If you're stopped, ask the officer if you're free to leave. If the answer is yes, calmly walk away immediately. If you're detained, you're free to ask the officer what crime you're suspected of committing. And you can also remind the officer that taking photographs is your right under the First Amendment and does not constitute suspicion of criminal activity. Again, a perfect world scenario. If they're going to do it to the legal observers, chances are they wouldn't hesitate to do it to someone who wasn't. And we know that to be true as well. And once again, if you believe your rights have been violated, collect as much information as you can, as soon as you can, contact information for witnesses, photographs of anything relevant, and reach out to NYCLU, ACLU, NLG as a best next step. And we've been more than happy to walk you through the process to make sure that you have every opportunity to redress your grievances. Okay, this is just reiterating if you're stopped. So we'll cruise through this one. Once again, we've made this available. This is going to be on the recording, and I don't need to repeat it for the sake of everybody here a third time. This is new. Protesting while social distancing. While protest is vital to social justice, The rules for protest are legally different, and especially in New York, in a state of emergency under COVID-19. If you're planning on engaging in protest, here's what you need to know. When you need to wear a face covering, while in a public place and unable to maintain 6 feet of distance from other people, when using public transportation or hired vehicles. The only 2 groups that are exempt from this currently are children 2 years or younger and people unable to medically tolerate a face covering. One of the things we haven't seen enforced here virtually at all, and there has been heavy enforcement elsewhere, have been the social distancing guidelines at demonstrations or generally in public. I know some bars and restaurants, actually restaurants and bars with food have had some of these issues, but we haven't seen that yet in Western New York from the police. Continuing that, you have the right to gather in groups of up to 10, while actually now in phase 3, we're up to, I believe, 25, but we haven't seen them disperse the crowds for the demonstrations for that strict reason alone.
Right.
Of course, you're allowed to hold signs or flyers, pamphlets, and expressive materials, and filming and police activity. While suggested to maintain the social distance, we haven't seen enforcement of that here with regard to demonstrations and protests. While New Yorkers have the constitutional right to engage in protest activity in public spaces and in public parks, including the right to distribute flyers and leaflets, etc. At the same time, all cities can impose restrictions and in some instances require permits to ensure demonstrations maintain order. Permit requirements you do or do not need. You don't need a permit to distribute flyers on a public sidewalk or in a public park, to have a demonstration or rally or press conference on a public sidewalk, or to march on a public sidewalk without amplified sound. You do need a permit to legally use amplified sound on public property. We have been fortunate in Buffalo and Western New York that we have not seen strict enforcement of that in quite some time with regard to the use of amplified sound in small packages. The first day of protest, there was 2 competing groups at Niagara Square using such devices in plain view of the police, and there was no enforcement action that was witnessed. But it's not to say that they could not have. Again, you need a permit for amplified sound on public property, especially if it's going to alter the time, place, and manner circumstances of the forum. In this case, a public space. Now, New York City also has the requirement for those situations and events with more than 20 people. We haven't seen that here with regard to the public square, with regard to permits. However, it's helpful to remember that if there's a permitted event in that place, they have the priority because that's the manner of that particular space. For instance, we ran into this during Occupy with questions around scheduled public events and demonstrations that were already taking place in the square. Conducting a march in public street, again, we're going back to the gray area. While they have been very lenient on enforcement of that in recent days, they could legally crack down on a public march or a march in public streets because they can blame it on safety issues, and that's why that's relevant. The procession involving 50 or more vehicles or bicycles in the public street is a New York City-based one. I didn't get a chance to edit out of this presentation. And again, the last 3 areas are just what you're allowed not to do or not to do in public spaces. And I think we've covered the flyering, remain moving, not obstructing doorways and public walkways. Now, this is big, and it's becoming more and more important every day. Protecting yourself at protests and demonstrations. Can't underscore this one enough because one of the biggest problems we've seen over the years is not enough prior preparation, even from groups who should know better, that don't prepare people sometimes, or it's not as much of a concern when it's something that's always of a concern to us. Whenever possible, we're telling people use the buddy system. Carry identification just in case. No brainer. Comfortable shoes, water, snacks, especially with the heat and humidity. And I know there's been a lot of folks paying attention to that in recent days. This is a new one. The city for the first time displayed its long-range acoustic device, which they had present at the very first demonstration. We got pictures of them having deployed it at the old courthouse. It generates sound. Well, it can be used two ways. It can be used to amplify voice for a dispersal order. And it also has a mode which will direct a cone of sound in a given direction. At its maximum, it can debilitate people. I personally have seen one deployed once in that way during the 2004 demonstrations when we backed up legal observers in Philadelphia at one of the political conventions. The only way to protect yourself is running parallel to where the sound is coming from. Because it is such a narrow cone, you have to get out of the path of the cone. So if it's a straight line distance, just get left or right of the sound as fast as you can. One of the reasons why we recommend earplugs. We have not seen them deploy that in this fashion yet, but they didn't hesitate to have it on hand. And as demonstrations continue, it wouldn't surprise me if at some point they do decide to deploy it in that way. And forewarned is forearmed. If you need to have medications with you, bring them in the original containers whenever possible. It is a crime in the state of New York, even if you're prescribed a drug, to have it outside of its prescription container under certain circumstances. Ensure that someone not at the protest or demonstration knows that you are there. One of the things that I appreciate most about Buffalo, New York, is that the legal folks here on the ground with the Civil Liberties Union, the National Lawyers Guild city chapter, and our friends over at Legal Aid, is we have a process from beginning to end that has involvement from one of those groups, and the folks at Legal Aid who are catching the arraignments for those that have had to endure them or get taken in is a very close coordination with the legal observers, both with the Lawyers Guild and ourselves at the Civil Liberties Union, as Derek can easily attest to, having played that role a few times. Right. So it's very rare that one of the groups is not aware of who's going and who's been arrested, but it's not to say that in a situation involving multiple arrests in multiple places that we would be able to have that type of oversight, which is why it's most helpful for people to know that are not at the event that someone is at the event in case they don't check in. If you can't remember an emergency contact number, keep in mind they will confiscate your phone if you are detained or arrested. Write the contact number on your arm. There's many times that when there's local demonstrations that are large enough or we're aware enough that we'll set up a legal hotline ahead of time. And passcode your phone. The iris scan and the fingerprint, they can be defeated by simply grabbing your hand or having you look at it. And it's happened. There's plenty of examples of that. There's nothing safer than passcoding your phone. They can't force you to unlock it. Who should probably not protest or demonstrate? Believe it or not, this is a good question. We try to advise people that if they are in a questionable documentation status with regard to being an immigrant or a new American, that probably wouldn't be safe if they were in police custody. Those who may already be involved in matters before the courts, perhaps minor criminal or civil proceedings, might want to think it through, get advice of counsel before they participate. And while many vigils are all ages friendly, and some protests as well, be considerate of which demonstrations and protests might not be suitable for children and or pets, especially with the temperature of what the demonstrations have been lately. It might be wise to second guess bringing little ones or the pets for just that reason. And now here comes the best part, the questions. This is our contact info. I've got the up-to-date contact info from the City of Buffalo chapter of the Lawyers Guild, and as well as our office, the New York Civil Liberties Union here in Buffalo, the ACLU of New York. And if we like, we can take some questions now. I know Dare's available to answer any of the tricky ones, and I can probably take the softball ones.
So do people have some questions? You can just raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we'll be happy to have whatever questions you have answered. Are there some questions?
And also, Dare, was there any points that you wanted to underscore or highlight that
Sure.
maybe I went over too quickly or didn't cover in the first part?
No, I think you did an excellent job. And then I would just remind people, but I think you did it on numerous occasions. A lot of times we're talking about what your rights are, but then what your rights are isn't always the same as what reality dictates.
Right.
Because as we've seen time and time again, you know, in a big way with Martin Gugino, they're saying one thing happened, and if it wasn't caught on video, that would have been the story from the side of the police. You know, they said he stumbled and fell, and if there wasn't a video that clearly showed that pushing him out of the way, then that would have been their truth. And all too often we have our truth, their truth, and the real truth. We of course, you know, because the real truth is on our side. But unless we can prove it, and that's something we should have to prove because we live in a country theoretically where you're innocent until proven guilty. But unfortunately, all too often we see how that plays out, and you do have to prove you're innocent, or that what you say happened is what in fact happened. So I think it's great how everybody's using their cell phones, and I encourage you to keep doing that. Like John said, you can photograph, so don't let somebody tell you that you can't photograph or videotape. However, at the same time I'm saying that, I've seen people arrested for it, you know, and the arrest won't necessarily be for photographing. They'll make up something else. The most two common things I think that people are probably arrested for in these situations are disorderly conduct. And then frequently that's coupled with sometimes resisting arrest, whether the person is resisting or not, and or obstruction of governmental administration. So they're basically, you know, arresting you for one thing and then saying that you forcing them to arrest you is somehow an obstruction.
Right.
Keep in mind too that more often than not, we can find the resources for when demonstrators or protesters are peacefully arrested, and legal aid, the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo is well aware of how this stuff works. They're well aware on how to proceed with it. And there are a number of attorneys that have been available to pinch hit in those cases. And I know we're putting together some things right now with the Lawyers Guild here in Buffalo, because we've had a number of private attorneys step forward in recent weeks willing to defend protesters that are arrested for peaceably demonstrating under the premise of the resisting, obstruction, and the disorderly conduct. So generally, if we know, be safe, and we can work through things with the legal resources that are at hand.
And I guess just to simply put, I would just want to add to that, while John's telling you what your rights are and what your civil liberties are, please remember that even though we're telling you that you have the right to do these things, that doesn't mean you won't be arrested for exercising your rights and your civil liberties being violated by the police for doing what you should be doing, you know, and it's something that then occasionally has to be fought down the road, but they might do the arrest to get you off the street temporarily because it suits their needs. So please just remember, whatever we say, there's the law and then there's reality. And sometimes the two don't meet as often as they should.
So, you know, I want to come back to those, especially those three charges. But we do have a couple of questions actually from Pat Murphy. Patricia Murphy is asking if a person is, a couple of things. One, if a person is on parole, do they have the same right to protest as someone who is not?
If I can just field that real quickly, if you're on parole, or like John said, if you have a questionable immigration status, you are best not to avoid it completely. I mean, I don't want to discourage you from exercising your constitutional rights, but the fact of the matter is, a condition of any parole I'm familiar with is no police contact. So if there is any police contact, you immediately have to contact your parole officer. And then it's going to be up to them to determine before, and this is before, might be before you even go to court, you know, to get it dismissed. they're going to have to make a determination of whether or not there should be a violation, or they'll write the judge and ask the judge whether or not you should be violated for this police contact. And the police contact might be something insane as far as what really happened. You know, it might be resisting arrest, obstruction, and everything else. And so instead of like just going in there, getting everything ACD'd, all of a sudden, in addition to that, then you've got a parole violation, right, which doesn't necessarily go away just because the charges are dismissed. So I would just, anyone on probation, parole, or with a questionable immigration status, I think they need to protect themselves first. There's a lot of people out here to stand up. And I think sometimes we have to take turns standing up for each other. And then one of the ways we can protect each other is making sure that our brothers and sisters on parole and probation or having any kind of immigration problems aren't the people on the front line getting arrested.
So your point again is, you know, the difference between what might be your rights and what might be the reality of what you actually are able to do.
Right. You absolutely on parole have a right to be there and exercise your First Amendment rights. But my fear is if you are, you can still be arrested for that.
Right.
You know, it might not be legally, you know, it might be illegally arrested for that, but it could cause you all sorts of grief. So, you know, when the police step up, frequently you see the police coming before there's an arrest. Usually there's a warning. I mean, you could, if you really felt the need to get out there, you know, you could just hope that that happened. And you split at the first kind of notice of any kind of possible police enforcement. But there are times when it comes as a total shock and all of a sudden everybody's running and the police are just grabbing people indiscriminately. And I would hate for one of those people to be somebody on parole or probation.
Right, right. Now, we also have the question, if a person is arrested while protesting and then detained longer than the duration of the prescription medicine that they brought with them, are they able to have somebody come and bring them more medication?
Well, I mean, theoretically, yes. The real question is, will they get it? I think they probably would, because I mean, it depends on what kind of a time period you're talking about. If this is somebody that ends up getting charged with something that doesn't fall within the preview of the changes in the bail, most of the arrests currently, the vast majority, you know, there's been a couple we've seen that don't fall into this category, but the vast majority are going to end up being desk appearance tickets, or if they're arraigned, they're going to be released on their own recognizance. You know, based on the charges, they're not, you know, bailable offenses under the new law. So you would assume then that these people, even if they were held for an arraignment, they'd probably be out definitely within 24 hours. If they weren't and they ended up in the holding center because they couldn't make bail for one reason or another, then you absolutely can make arrangements to have the medication, you know, like the Erie County Holding Center notified that this person has to be on such and such a medication. There's an infirmary in there. They're supposed to take notice of that. It's good to have somebody call and threaten to sue, because I've had situations where somebody's complaining that they're not getting their diabetes medicine or what have you. And, you know, it appeared to be, it wasn't until a call was made and they were threatened with a lawsuit that things were expedited to make sure that the person got their medicine. But again, I can't give you a definitive answer to that. Should they? If you're at the square and you got arrested, you're just taken over to police headquarters, you're getting processed, which, you know, they could probably do in an hour. It depends on how hard it is to confirm your identity. Sometimes people don't want to give up their fingerprints, so they might hold you for an arraignment in that situation till they can confirm your identity. Or, you know, for one reason or another, having a difficulty, they're holding you for an extended period of time. Even if they're not, however, in this latest bunch of arrests, it seems like they hold somebody for like an unnecessarily long time so that they can get them off the street and out of the square until things die down. And they're using the processing system to achieve that goal. So in other words, somebody might be arrested for curfew violation, or, you know, I'm referring to one of the first set of arrests for a curfew violation a little after 8, but they're not released till like 4:30 in the morning. There's no way it should have taken that long. I think It probably took that long because they wanted to hold that person off the square that long, in the hopes that everything would dissipate. If that person needed medication and that they need to take every 4 hours, you could go to police headquarters and hand it. That's why it would be good to work with an affinity person, or like to have an affinity group that makes sure, like John was suggesting, and that I know Vicki, the Peace Center, gives trainings where you have somebody that's going to watch your back. If you're going to get arrested, then they're going to make sure that so-and-so is notified, that they have your medication, although that would get kind of weird too, depending on the medication. You can't really hold somebody else's medication, or then you could get in trouble for that if you're searched, depending on the medication, of course. But and I'm sorry to be long-winded, there's no quick answer. They should get it if you take it over, and they should provide it to that person, but will they? I don't know. There's never any guarantees.
Right. So I want to ask again whether there are there some other questions that have come up. I do have a question, but I'd like to defer to somebody else.
Well, and keep in mind too that even if you come up with a question after we're done here this evening,
Sure.
all that contact information is still up on the screen, and we're more than happy to take calls and questions. We're all over social media, just like our friends over at the Lawyers Guild are, and we're always approachable when these things need to be addressed.
So what I'd like to go to a little bit about, you mentioned those three charges that would be your most likely, one being disorderly conduct, and one being obstruction of governmental administration, and what was the third one you mentioned?
Resisting, the Trinity we
resisting,
darkly call them.
Right. So I'd love it if you would talk a little bit more about those, because they seem to be the most popular ones, and I know sometimes we've been very extremely orderly in our civil disobedience, and yet it was called disorderly conduct. So I'd like to know a little bit more what those things really entail.
Well, I mean, if you look at, they've got to have some reason when they go in originally and move in and start making mass arrests. So more often than not, that's going to be based, at least historically, it's been based on disorderly conduct. And so if that's actually under penal law section, for anyone that wants to look it up, we could probably make a copy here and post it so people actually see the statute. It's very short, but I'm going to just read the pertinent sections that they usually use. Mm-hmm. So disorderly conduct under penal law section 240.20 is a person is guilty of disorderly conduct when, and then think of this as like poetry, or you're reading iambic pentameter. Like each thing that you read is an element that they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So disorderly conduct when, with intent. So it's an intent crime. You have to intend these things. And more often than not, the people who are getting arrested aren't intending these things. With intent to cause public inconvenience, annoyance, or alarm. Now, that's really important, whether it's an or an and, for obvious reasons. But if you intend to cause any one of those three things, or recklessly creating a situation or risk thereof, that's the fallback one that they usually rely on. And then under that, there's a semicolon, and then there's 7 subparagraphs. The ones that they usually use, there's only 7, so I'll read them real quick. The ones they usually use are sub 6 and sub 7. Sub 1 is he or she engages in fighting or in violent, tumultuous, or threatening behavior, or he makes unreasonable noise. That's subjective, but they got to use usually a decibel count at some point. Or 3, in a public place, he uses abusive or obscene language or makes an obscene gesture. That's all fraught with potential First Amendment rights, depending on what it is we're talking about. Or 4, without lawful authority, he disturbs any lawful, and I'm reading he because that's what they have. He disturbs any lawful assembly or meeting of persons. Or 5, this is a common one that they use occasionally when there's a march going down the street. Number 5, subparagraph 5 is he obstructs vehicular or pedestrian traffic. Or number 6, again, this is another one that they frequently use. He congregates with other persons in a public place and refuses to comply with a lawful order of the police to disperse. Now, a lot frequently, again, that's another element, is it's got to be a lawful order. So a lot of times you're arguing about whether or not the order itself is lawful. Right. When arguing whether or not the statute was truly violated by the defendant. 7, he creates a hazardous or physically offensive condition by any act which serves no legitimate purpose. And again, you can imagine, they may not consider it legitimate. Well, we very well may consider it legitimate. In fact, maybe the only legitimate thing that's going on. All right, in addition to that, so that's usually why they move in and where they allegedly are making arrests. It's a violation of the law. So if they're going to arrest you for it at the time, then it's got to be something that they witnessed. So they move in, they arrest you for one of the subsections under disorderly conduct. If you bump them or anything, they might also charge you with harassment second, another violation. Or if it's anything more than a bump, they might charge you with assault, or an assault on a police officer. So you got to be very careful in how you respond when they are coming.
So don't touch them? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Pardon me?
At the very least, don't touch them.
Yeah, don't touch them if you can help it. I've literally seen cases where, a second-degree felony assault because a cop, cut their knuckle on somebody's tooth that they hit. So try to keep your face, try not to hurt their fist with your face if you can avoid it. So once they have the reason or a reasonable cause to believe that they can come in and arrest you, then it's how you respond to that arrest, whether you believe it lawful or not, that they're going to start piling on these other things that we talked about, such as obstruction. And that's basically, saying that they're a lawful arm of the government and that they're carrying on their lawful business and you're interfering with that somehow. It used to be a requirement that it was a physical type interference. It's a little more gray now. Sometimes people are, their arms are so big, or, there's, injuries that make it difficult for them to put their hands behind their back to be cuffed, and they'll be struggling because they're in extreme pain. And the officers will take that and charge them then with resisting arrest and obstruction. So it gets crazy is what I'm saying.
Right.
And that's why, if I might add real quickly, it's really good. Like the things that John is telling you and the things Vicky are telling you are great, but it's like tennis, it's like karate. If you want to exercise your rights, then you better practice. And I think John turned me on to, there's a website, it's called flexyourrights.org. And it's all about practicing how you should respond to police officers in a stop on the street, if they come to your door, if they come to your car. And because if you don't, it's hard not to be intimidated. Everybody thinks, the officer is going to ask if they can look in your car trunk, and you're going to say, no, I'm going to exercise my constitutional rights. You have no reason to, no. But when you're sitting there on the side of the road and it's very dark and the lights are flashing and it's wet out and you're scared and you want to get home and blah, 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 all of a sudden you're like, yeah, go ahead, and then one thing leads to another. And some people would say, well, if you're innocent, it doesn't matter. Yeah, but there can be situations where you don't even know what's in your trunk, or maybe it is in your trunk, and blah, 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 blah. So,
well, it's very interesting that 20 years ago, we were given these courses. It was know your rights. And even before demonstrations, it's evolved into surviving police encounters as really the direction that we've gone in.
Well, and this is where I'd like to just add one little piece, which is about our alert systems. So I want to say, as somebody who has gotten stopped not that many times, a medium amount of times, most often behind the wheel, I know and as a white woman who is probably, you know, decently dressed or something like that, I do not have any, I have no reason to fear. And let me tell you that, of course, my heart is racing a mile a minute, just like almost anybody who ever gets stopped by the police. So I just want to say, one of the things that we need to be able to do, just so that we can even think clearly enough to do the things that you're suggesting, right? To say, am I being detained? To say, no, you don't have the right to. We have to be calm enough that our upper brain is not shut down, which means that we have to be in control of that alert system. So I just want to urge people that one big piece of being ready for that is deep, slow breathing, is being calm yourself, calming yourself, just that self-soothing. Deep, slow breathing means, you know, just breathing in, holding it, maybe breathing out twice as slow. That can also help calm other people. And I mean, in any situation, not just with the police, but just that reminder of breathing. Even now, I think if anyone is conscious of our breathing now, that has just taken the stress level down just a little bit, which I don't think there's probably a huge stress level going on right now. So that when we really are stressed out, it makes a difference. It makes a difference in our clear thinking, and it can make a difference in defusing the situation. So I'd say that's the easiest way to do it. And certainly also if this is a process that's going on for a while, it's a means of keeping our cool, to just either conscious breathing, or when we're breathing, you know, to just breathe out twice as slowly. And just remember that there's going to be another day to argue this. So for example, and I want to say, maybe this segues right back into what you were talking about, that fighting it in court is where we might win. And there's issues with the court system, of course, too. But when you have a good lawyer like Dare or other good lawyers, and the law is on your side and you can prove your point, then you can't argue or, you know, actually you don't want to argue and escalate the situation. You want to make sure that you're not escalating the situation, because back to the impunity question. So keeping calm does become important.
Well, you keep in mind, we'll be doing this again on Sunday out at Niagara Square. I'll have a lot of pamphlets and literature to hand out. Make sure that everybody's got a little reminder with them. And if there's no other questions, I want to say thank you. I really appreciate it, Vicki, for giving us this opportunity. And Dare, always, you've always been there for these types of things, and it's always appreciated.
So I will give one more last call for questions. Okay, well, you can always join us on the square, or you can take this down. We have the recording. It was recorded live on Facebook as well, so we can share the recording with you. Thank you at Spectrum News. We're glad you'll be reporting on all this good information. And we can also see you at 1 o'clock on Niagara Square. So,
and one just quick, one positive note, I do think it's better to, if you can somehow survive the encounter, which I know isn't easy, because same thing, Vicki, you know, as like a white entitled male, I've gotten stopped by state police, you know, like driving too fast, and I was just about to go into Grand Island, I think, or across the bridge, you know, and that was back when I still cigarettes, chain smoked cigarettes, and I had a cigarette in my finger on the steering wheel, and officer stuck his head in my car, which he has nowhere to do. Doesn't matter if he has a right or not, because it's dark, we're on the side of the road, and it's his word against mine, and then tells me to put out the effing cigarette, you know. And I've got a temper, I admit it, you know. But if I couldn't just like swallow I don't know how people can, because what I had was like, you know, there was a nothing taste of reality, you know, for people.
right.
But if you can survive, if you can see your way straight to survive, locally, our courts, I think, are pretty good and are pretty receptive to these arguments that we're talking about, as well as the First Amendment and all the constitutional rights and the liberties and the statutory rights that you have. You know, so it's a better place to make your stand.
I just want
thank
to
you all very much.
response to that. Holding it, breathing out, release it slowly. Well, and I want, what were you going to say, dear? I know you were.
I said, if you can. Yeah.
If you can. Well, it takes that awareness to even think of it. It's hard to think of it because our upper brain shuts down. So that's another thing that we can practice. So I want to thank Dare. I want to thank you so much. John, thank you so very, very much. You both are just real wonderful, what can I say? You know, resources, leaders, really such a huge help to the community. So we're very, very grateful for you both.
Thanks so much, Vicki. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you, everybody. Okay.
I look forward to 1 o'clock Sunday.
We're all in this together. Thank you for coming. Big truth and love, unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality and in the court. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. We'll see you. We'll see you another day. We're grateful. Okay. Take care. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Christopher.